They never told you that the loudest person in the room is usually the most insecure. Think about it. The meetings where someone talks over everyone, the arguments where someone keeps repeating their point, the moments when people rush to defend themselves before anyone even accuses them. Noise feels powerful, but it isn't. Real power is quiet, and most people never learn this. You grew up in a world that rewarded quick answers and constant reactions. In school, the student who raised their hand fastest looked smart. In conversations, the person who had something to say immediately looked confident. On social media, the ones who responded instantly looked relevant. So you learned a dangerous habit without even realizing it. You learned to fill silence. You learned to explain yourself too quickly. You learned to react before you understood what was really happening. But here's the truth that changes everything. Silence is not empty. Silence is information. Watch any tense moment between two people. The one who speaks first often gives away their position. The one who rushes to explain reveals their insecurity. The one who reacts emotionally shows exactly where they can be controlled. But the one who stays calm, the one who pauses, the one who lets the moment breathe, that person holds the power. There was a man named Armand who learned this the hard way. For most of his life, Armand believed being understood was the same as being respected. Whenever someone questioned him, he immediately explained. Whenever there was tension, he rushed to clear the air. Whenever someone misunderstood his intentions, he spoke longer, louder, faster. He thought he was being mature. He thought he was being honest. But slowly, quietly, something was happening beneath the surface. People started interrupting him more. They questioned his decisions more often. They pushed his boundaries without hesitation. Armand couldn't understand why. "I'm being clear," he told himself. "I'm communicating. I'm doing the right thing." But one evening changed everything. It happened during a meeting at work. Nothing dramatic at first, just a small disagreement about a project deadline. One of his colleagues casually said, "I'm not sure Armand handled this the right way." The room got quiet. And like always, Armand jumped in immediately. He explained the timeline, he justified his decisions, he walked everyone through his reasoning step by step. The more he talked, the more he felt the need to keep talking, because something strange was happening. The room wasn't leaning in, they were leaning back, eyes drifting, energy dropping. And when he finally stopped speaking, his manager simply nodded and said, "All right." Not impressed, not convinced, just done. That night, Armand sat in his car longer than usual. Something felt off. Not painful, not dramatic, just off. Like he had been slowly losing something without noticing. Respect, presence, weight. You see, most people think respect comes from proving your point, but psychology tells a different story. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with silence. When a pause stretches too long, the mind starts filling in the blanks. People begin projecting their own assumptions, their own doubts, their own expectations. And here's the twist almost no one teaches you. The person who stays calm during silence controls the emotional temperature of the room, because silence creates pressure, and pressure reveals people. A few days after that meeting, Armand experienced something that made his stomach drop. He was in another discussion, another disagreement, another moment where someone questioned his decision. He opened his mouth to explain, and then he stopped, just for a second. A small pause, barely noticeable, but something interesting happened. The other person kept talking. They started over-explaining, defending, backtracking, filling the space. Armand said almost nothing, and for the first time in years, the energy shifted toward him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. That was the moment the question entered his mind for the first time. What if silence is not weakness? What if silence is leverage? From that day forward, Armand began noticing something most people miss completely. The strongest people in any room rarely rush to speak. The most respected leaders don't react instantly. The people who command quiet attention don't fight to be heard. They let silence do part of the work. But this realization didn't make Armand instantly powerful. In fact, it made things uncomfortable, because the first stage of mastering silence feels like losing control. When you stop explaining yourself, your mind panics. It whispers dangerous thoughts. They'll misunderstand you. They'll think you're wrong. You need to fix this now. Your heart beats faster. Your chest tightens. Your ego screams for relief. And most people break. They talk too soon. They explain too much. They give away their position before the moment fully unfolds. But Armand made a quiet decision. He would experiment. Just small moments, just small pauses, just long enough to observe what really happens when he doesn't rush to fill the silence. And what he discovered next changed the way he saw every conversation for the rest of his life. Because silence doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. And most people are not ready for what that mirror reveals. The first time Armand truly held his silence, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with no railing. Every instinct in his body told him to speak. It happened during a conversation that, on the surface, looked completely normal. A colleague questioned one of his decisions again, the kind of moment where the old Armand would immediately jump in with a long explanation, trying to make everything clear, trying to make everyone comfortable. But this time, he paused. Just 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Inside his chest, it felt like 30. His mind started racing. Say something. Fix this. Don't let the silence get awkward. But he stayed still. And something fascinating began to unfold right in front of him. The colleague who had questioned him started talking more. First, casually. Then, defensively. Then, almost nervously. Words started spilling out faster than before. Extra justifications, unnecessary details, small backtracks hidden inside confident sentences. Armand hadn't said a single word, yet the entire emotional balance of the conversation had shifted. That was the moment he understood something most people never notice. When you rush to explain yourself, you release pressure. When you stay calm in silence, pressure builds, and pressure makes people reveal themselves. From that day forward, Armand began studying silence the way most people study success. He noticed how people reacted when conversations stretched longer than expected. He noticed how quickly others filled uncomfortable gaps. He noticed how often people exposed their true emotions when they thought they needed to win the moment. And slowly, quietly, his behavior began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but consistently. He started answering questions with fewer words. He stopped over-clarifying small decisions. He allowed conversations to breathe instead of rushing to control every second. At first, it felt unnatural, like walking with new shoes that hadn't softened yet. Because here's what nobody tells you about mastering silence. It will feel uncomfortable before it feels powerful. Your ego hates silence. Your ego wants immediate validation. Your ego wants to be understood right now. But emotional strength, real emotional strength, is the ability to sit calmly inside that discomfort without rushing to escape it. One afternoon, Armand faced the kind of moment that used to completely drain him. A group discussion turned slightly tense, nothing explosive, just subtle friction, the kind that makes most people talk faster and louder without realizing it. Someone made a sharp comment about his work. The room went quiet. This was the old trigger. The old Armand would have jumped in immediately, explaining every detail, defending every choice, trying to smooth the tension as fast as possible. But the new Armand did something different. He looked at the person. Calm, steady, unrushed, and he said only one sentence. "I hear your concern." Then he stopped talking. No long defense, no emotional reaction, no nervous laughter to soften the moment, just calm presence. The silence that followed felt heavy, not awkward, heavy, because now the pressure had shifted. The person who made the comment suddenly had to carry the weight of the conversation, and just like before, They started filling the space, explaining what they meant, softening their tone, adding context that made their original comments sound less certain than before. Armand simply listened, and in that moment, something inside him clicked permanently. Respect does not come from how much you say. Respect comes from how little you need to say. But this transformation came with an unexpected challenge. As Armand spoke less, people started noticing more. At first, it was subtle. Conversations with him became shorter but more focused. Interruptions happened less often. People waited for his response instead of talking over him. But then came the moment that truly tested everything he had learned. It happened during a high-pressure meeting where multiple voices were competing for control of the room, opinions flying, energy rising, everyone trying to prove their point. In the middle of the noise, someone suddenly turned to Armand and said, "You've been quiet. What do you think?" The old anxiety tried to come back, that familiar urge to over-deliver, to over-explain, to justify his thinking in perfect detail. For a split second, his heart sped up, but this time, he was ready. He spoke slowly, clearly, with fewer words than ever before. And then, he stopped. No rambling, no defensive tone, no extra explanation to make everyone comfortable, just clarity. Then, silence. What happened next surprised even him. The room leaned in. People listened more carefully than before. No one interrupted. No one dismissed his point. Because when you remove unnecessary noise from your words, your voice gains weight. But the real shift wasn't just happening around Armand. It was happening inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't mentally exhausted after every serious conversation. He wasn't replaying every word in his head later that night. He wasn't feeling that familiar drain that comes from constantly trying to manage how others perceive you. Because silence does something powerful to your nervous system. It slows you down. It grounds you. It forces you to respond instead of react. And in a world addicted to instant reactions, the person who responds calmly stands out immediately. But here's the deeper truth Armand eventually realized, the part most motivational advice completely misses. Silence is not about saying less. Silence is about needing less approval. The day you stop explaining every move, every decision, every intention, is the day you quietly reclaim your emotional independence. And once that shift begins, people don't just hear you differently, they feel you differently. But the real test of silence was still coming, because staying calm in normal conversations is one thing. Staying silent when someone tries to provoke you, that's where the real psychological battle begins. And Armand was about to face exactly that. The real test of silence never happens when the room is calm. It happens when someone is trying to pull a reaction out of you. And Armand was about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. It started on an ordinary day that didn't feel important at all. A normal discussion, a normal tone. Nothing dramatic on the surface, but beneath the words there was pressure building, the kind you don't notice until it's already tightening around your chest. Someone challenged him, not aggressively, not loudly, but deliberately. It was the kind of comment designed to make you defend yourself. The old Armand would have taken the bait instantly. He would have jumped in with explanations, clarifications, emotional energy spilling everywhere. He would have tried to fix the tension as fast as possible. But the new Armand felt something different inside his body. Awareness. He noticed his heartbeat. He noticed the small surge of heat in his chest. He noticed the familiar urge rising, that deep, almost automatic need to respond immediately. And for the first time in his life, he didn't obey it. He let the moment breathe. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. To most people, it would have looked like nothing, but psychologically, everything was happening in that space. Because here is what almost no one teaches you about silence. When someone tries to provoke you, they are not just looking for words, they are looking for emotional movement. They want to see the shift in your face, They want to hear the change in your tone. They want proof that they reached you. And the moment you rush to explain yourself emotionally, you give them exactly what they were unconsciously searching for. But Armin stayed still. Not cold, not arrogant, just calm, present, unmoved. And something subtle but powerful happened in the room. The person who challenged him began to feel the weight of their own words. You could see it in the small shifts, the slight hesitation, the tiny adjustment in tone. Because silence creates a mirror. When you don't immediately react, people are forced to sit with their own energy, their own intention, their own uncertainty. Armin finally spoke, but only after the emotional wave had already passed. His voice was steady, measured, controlled, not defensive, not emotional, just clear. And that was the moment everything changed permanently. Because people didn't just hear his words, they felt his composure. And composure is magnetic. But the biggest transformation wasn't visible on the outside. It was happening deep inside Armin's nervous system. For years, he'd lived in quiet tension without realizing it, always preparing responses, always managing perceptions, always trying to make sure nobody misunderstood him. It was exhausting. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face, but slowly drains your presence. But now, something was different. For the first time in years, conversations weren't battles he needed to win. They were moments he could simply observe. And that shift, that quiet, internal shift, is where real power is born. Because the psychology of silence is not about becoming quiet on the outside. It's about becoming unshakable on the inside. Most people misunderstand silence. They think silence means weakness. They think silence means you have nothing to say. They think silence means you lost. But in reality, strategic silence is one of the highest forms of emotional control. It means you are no longer reacting from pressure. You are choosing from clarity. Weeks passed, then months, and the changes around Armin became impossible to ignore. People interrupted him less. They listened more carefully when he spoke. Conversations with him felt calmer, heavier, more focused. But the biggest transformation came one evening when a colleague pulled him aside and said something he never expected to hear. "You've changed," they said quietly. Armin didn't rush to respond. He simply looked at them, calm, curious, and they continued. "You don't try to prove yourself anymore. It's different. People take you more seriously now." That was it. Simple words, but they confirmed everything. Respect had never been about explaining more. It had always been about needing to explain less. And in that moment, Armin finally understood the deepest truth of all. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is controlled power. It is the discipline to pause when your ego wants to react. It is the strength to stay grounded when pressure rises. It is the confidence to know that your value does not increase just because you speak more. The world is full of noise, arguments, defenses, explanations layered on top of explanations. Everyone trying to be heard, very few learning how to be felt. But the people who master silence, the ones who stay calm when others rush, the ones who speak with precision instead of panic, they move differently through life. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more grounded, more respected, more in control of their own energy. And here is the realization that most people discover far too late. The moment you stop over-explaining, the moment you stop rushing to defend every misunderstanding, the moment you become comfortable with a little silence in the room, that is the moment your presence starts carrying weight. Because real confidence is quiet, real strength is steady, and real power does not need to raise its voice to be felt.